This storm is moving around erratically, everybody, and I mean that in the truest sense of the word. Bertha has been wobbling, stalling, doing little loops out there, and honestly, it's giving the models fits trying to nail down exactly where it wants to go next. It is still holding on at tropical storm strength, but just barely. And it's actually gone through a little bit of a weakening trend since our last update. Now that could change again this evening and into tomorrow, because there's still some warm water underneath it that could let it re-strengthen if the shear backs off even a little bit. We still have tropical storm watches out, and in some spots, warnings stretching from the Florida Panhandle across the coast of Alabama and Mississippi and all the way around into southeastern Louisiana. But here's the thing, everybody, the track has shifted a bit since this morning. It's drifting a touch further south than what we were showing you yesterday, and that's because of this upper-level shear that keeps grabbing at it from the northeast. That shear has been the whole story with this system from day one. Now, when this shear relaxes some, which the models think happens later tonight, Bertha is expected to try to strengthen a little bit. We're talking maybe getting up to near 50 miles per hour, sustained winds at its peak. Some outlier guidance shows a bit higher than that. But the general consensus has actually come down from what we were forecasting 2 days ago. Then, as it gets closer to landfall, the shear comes roaring back, and that's going to knock it back down, possibly to 40 or 45 miles per hour. Sustained winds by the time it reaches the coast, somewhere in the vicinity of New Orleans. Though I want to stress that landfall point could still shift. Here's what's interesting and what you need to watch out for. This storm could downgrade even further than we're currently forecasting. If that dry air punches into the core the way a few of our reliable models are hinting, we could see this thing struggling to even hold tropical storm status by the time it comes ashore. And once it gets past the coast and pushes into the western part of the state, toward the West Bank and on into southwestern Louisiana, we could be talking sustained winds in the 35 to 40 mile per hour range, essentially a tropical depression by that point. But don't let that fool you into thinking there's nothing to worry about. Even a weakening system like this is going to bring some real impacts. We're still watching for a tornado threat right along the Gulf Coast, the kind of quick spin-up tornadoes that come off these tropical systems and don't give you much warning. There's also going to be storm surge to deal with, and some heavy rain bands that could produce localized flooding well inland from where the center actually crosses the coast. Meanwhile, off to the west, we've got impacts coming into the Pacific Northwest from an entirely separate system, a tropical remnant pushing moisture up into northern California, Washington, Oregon, and stretching all the way into Idaho and Montana. That's bringing some rain and cooler temperatures to a region that's been dealing with heat, so that's actually some welcome relief in a lot of ways. And then we've got our severe weather setup happening right now across parts of the country, completely separate from Bertha. And honestly, this is going to be more of an immediate concern for a lot of you watching this. We've got storms already firing, and this activity is expected to really ramp up within the next hour or two. Now, let me walk you through the official information, because there's a lot of noise out there, and I want you working off the real numbers. According to the latest advisory, Bertha is experiencing moderate to strong northeasterly shear, and forecasters expect that pattern to persist for the next 18 to 24 hours. There is a chance for a burst of convection to develop on the southern side of the circulation during that window. And if that happens, it could help the storm organize and intensify some. That's your path toward it reaching a slightly higher peak intensity. But after that window closes, the shear is forecast to increase again, and several of the global models agree that this increase will be strong enough to disrupt the storm's core, basically tearing at its vertical structure and cutting off any further strengthening. So this is a storm that gets one shot at intensifying, and then the environment turns hostile on it again. Let's talk storm surge, because that's one of the bigger threats, even from a weaker system like this. We're looking at 1 to 3 feet of surge for the Florida Big Bend area, 1 to 2 feet for the Panhandle, and then it ramps up to 2 to 4 feet across southeastern Louisiana into Mississippi and Alabama, tapering back down to around 1 to 3 feet as you get toward Morgan City. On the rainfall side, most areas are looking at 1 to 2 inches over the 5-day period, with some pockets of 2 to 4 inches possible closer to the center, though it's not expecting to be a massive rain producer given how disorganized this system has been. Now, here's something I want you to pay attention to, because there's some disagreement out there. When you look at the automated forecast guidance, the more likely scenario has this topping out somewhere around 45 knots. There are 2 or 3 model members showing something stronger, but the bulk of the guidance is clustering in that weaker range. So the trend, if anything, has been toward a weaker system, not a stronger one. The ensemble data backs this up too, showing real difficulty for Bertha holding on to tropical storm strength for any extended period. If you go back and check where our confidence numbers stood, the chance of this reaching tropical storm strength was sitting around 60 to 70% a couple of days ago. That number has come down to somewhere in the 40 to 50% range now. And as for any chance of this becoming a hurricane, that's basically off the table at this point. Nobody serious is forecasting that. When you look at the track guidance, the storm is expected to take a bit of a northward jog over the next 24 to 48 hours before ultimately getting picked up and pulled toward the west. And once that westward turn happens, there's not going to be a whole lot of organized structure left to this thing. Mostly just some leftover moisture getting dragged along, but that moisture can still produce those tornado spin-ups along the coast and contribute to the surge, so don't write it off completely. Now here's where I want to give you a warning, because I know some of you are going to see this and get worried, or worse, some of you are going to see this and think it's the real forecast. There is one particular model, and I'm not going to give it more credit than it deserves, that has been consistently out of step with everything else. It's been the outlier for days now, showing the system spinning up into a significant hurricane, tracking it toward Louisiana, weakening briefly, and then somehow re-strengthening back toward hurricane status as it approaches Texas. Everybody, please do not believe this. This is the same model that's been wrong for days running, and it simply is not lining up with what the more reliable guidance or the official National Hurricane Center forecast is telling us. I'm showing it to you so you know what's out there, not because I think it's going to verify. The more trusted ensemble guidance, the kind that's actually been tracking the storm's behavior accurately, continues to show weakening as the system pushes west, and multiple other global models are now trending in that same direction, essentially catching up to what the more reliable short-range guidance has been saying for a couple of days already. That's usually a good sign that a forecast trend is solidifying when you see the different modeling systems start to converge rather than diverge. If you look at the ensemble spread from the most recent run, going out 24 to 30 hours, the vast majority of ensemble members show this staying a weak tropical storm, tracking generally toward the northwest. Only a small handful, maybe 4 or 5 members out of 24 plus, show any real strengthening scenario, and that puts the odds of a stronger outcome somewhere around 15 to 20%, which, if anything, is down slightly from where it stood a day ago. And when you push the track further west in those same ensemble members, virtually all of the stronger scenarios disappear entirely. Nobody is showing a strong system once it gets that far inland or that far west. Now let's talk about what's actually steering this thing, because that's the key to understanding why it's behaving so erratically. There's a ridge of high pressure sitting out near the Bahamas, and that ridge has been trying to nose westward and take control of the steering pattern. At the same time, there's a trough digging in from the north that's been blocking that high pressure from fully taking over. That trough is what's been pulling Bertha northward and keeping it from making a cleaner westward run. It's also the source of that northeasterly shear we keep talking about, along with some drier air getting entrained into the northern side of the circulation. As we move through the next day or so, expect that ridge to eventually win out and start pushing the system more toward the west. But it's taking its time getting there, which is part of why the track keeps wobbling and why the timing keeps shifting around in these updates. Looking at the upper level pattern, you can see the dry air signature clearly in the moisture imagery, sitting right on top of and to the north of the storm center. As the system tries to organize, that dry air keeps getting wrapped in. And it's honestly remarkable this thing is held together as well as it has given how much hostile air is around it. As we move into the overnight hours and toward tomorrow morning, expect the center to still show up as fairly well defined at the surface, but with all that dry air choking off the top of the storm, there's a hard ceiling on how much this can intensify. Once the westward turn really takes hold, you'll see the upper level moisture get pushed well to the south and east of the low level center, essentially getting sheared apart, while the surface circulation continues on its own separate path underneath. That's the kind of setup that really does a number on a tropical system, ripping the upper and lower levels apart from each other. Even so, on the surface level, we're still going to see the wind field, the surge potential, and the rainfall threat largely holding to what's been forecast, just at a slightly reduced intensity from what we might have expected a couple of days back. Pay close attention to the wind direction as this comes in, because that's going to determine exactly where you see the worst of the onshore flooding. As we go through the overnight period and into tomorrow morning, the system nudges further north, and that's when we start to see the onshore surge and the flood threat really ramp up along the coast. You're looking at wind gusts in the 40 to 50 mile per hour range across a good chunk of the warned area, with some localized spots potentially seeing gusts near 60. By tomorrow evening, the system continues pushing west along the coast, dragging that onshore flow with it. But the latest guidance shows a fairly sharp weakening trend kicking in right around that time. It's tried to reorganize a couple of times already, and it just hasn't been able to hold it together, and that pattern looks like it continues. Don't take that weakening trend to mean this becomes a non-event, though. It's still expected to reach tropical storm strength at some point. It's just not going to hold on to that strength for very long once it gets closer to land. Switching gears to the severe weather side of things, because this is honestly just as important for a lot of you watching. The tornado threat for today has actually increased in confidence, still sitting in an enhanced risk category, with a notable area of higher confidence for at least a couple of strong tornadoes. Wind gusts associated with these storms could reach 75 to 80 miles per hour in the more intense cells, and hail up to 2 inches in diameter is possible in the strongest storms as well. As we trek through the evening hours, expect storms to fire up across the western Great Lakes region, spreading into the upper Midwest, and intensifying as we move through the 6 and 7 o'clock hour. That activity continues to build through 8 and 9 o'clock, bringing the threat for hail, damaging winds, and a few tornadoes with it. By 10 and 11 o'clock, the line pushes further east, picking up more of a hail core with it, and continuing that damaging wind and tornado threat into the overnight hours, eventually working into the Great Lakes region proper and pushing toward the Ohio Valley by the early morning hours. Then tomorrow, expect a secondary round to develop, this time focused more toward the mid-Atlantic and into parts of the Northeast, with damaging wind gusts in the 50 to 70 mile per hour range possible in the strongest storms. As far as the bigger picture weather pattern, everything I laid out for you regarding the upcoming heat building in and the pattern shift later this month is still on track and still looking accurate. We've got a cold front working through, followed by a building heat dome, and that's going to set the stage for the pattern going into early August. The longer range guidance is still disagreeing somewhat on exactly how that plays out later in August, so we'll keep an eye on that and update you as we get more information. On the broader hurricane season outlook, the environment remains largely unfavorable heading into the coming weeks. Aside from this one system we're tracking right now, once Bertha moves through and weakens out, we're looking at a stretch where conditions turn hostile for development across a good chunk of the Atlantic basin. That doesn't mean nothing will happen. There are always areas worth keeping an eye on, but it does suggest we may get a bit of a lull after this. That's the latest on Bertha and everything else going on out there, everybody. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for helping get accurate information out there, because there's a lot of noise floating around and it means a lot that you trust this channel to cut through it. I'll be back tomorrow morning with another update on what's coming, and we'll keep tracking the system closely as it makes its final approach. Stay safe out there, keep an eye on the official watches and warnings for your area, and I'll see you again soon.